She got canceled not online, but at the front desk of a luxury hotel. The reason, her political views. But what the staff didn't know? They messed with the wrong woman. Leavitt had been traveling for nearly 10 hours across time zones, jumping from connecting flights to a bumpy town car ride through midtown Manhattan. It had been a long, exhausting day. All she wanted was a hot shower, a warm meal, and a few hours of peace before delivering one of the most important keynote speeches of her career at tomorrow's business summit. As she stepped into the marbled lobby of the Royal Monarch Hotel, a place known for discretion, luxury, and elite clientele, she exhaled with relief. The chandeliers sparkled above her like crystal crowns, and classical music played softly in the background. This was a place of comfort, of certainty. She'd stayed here before, many times. Wearing a sharp pink suit that turned heads, she wheeled her carry-on to the reception desk, expecting the usual quick check-in. "Good evening," she said with a professional smile. "Reservation for Leavitt." The receptionist, dressed in an impeccably tailored black uniform with gold buttons and crisp white gloves, glanced up from her screen. Her smile froze. Her eyes narrowed for the briefest second. Then she looked back down at her monitor. Leavitt noticed the shift immediately, the way the woman's fingers slowed on the keyboard, how she suddenly became overly focused on the screen. A strange silence hung between them. After a few more clicks, the receptionist finally looked up and said with an overly rehearsed tone, "Oh, Leavitt? Yes, I see your booking." Leavitt waited for the usual words. "Welcome back, here's your key card, enjoy your stay." Instead, the woman's expression hardened. "Unfortunately, we had to cancel your room." Leavitt blinked. "What?" The receptionist folded her hands neatly on the counter. "There was an issue with overbooking. We're terribly sorry, but we no longer have a room available for you tonight." Confused, Leavitt leaned forward slightly. "Overbooked? I made this reservation 2 months ago. This is my 3rd time staying here." "I understand," the receptionist replied flatly. "But there's nothing we can do at this time." Something wasn't right. Leavitt's instincts kicked in, the kind that had helped her navigate tense political panels, media firestorms, and high-stakes interviews. She could feel it. This wasn't just bad luck. "Is the hotel truly overbooked?" she asked calmly. "Or is something else going on?" The receptionist hesitated. Her posture stiffened. Then, in a quieter voice, she leaned in slightly and said, "Frankly, we've chosen to prioritize Mr. Robert De Niro. He'll be staying in your suite." Leavitt's stomach dropped. "Excuse me? It's better for the hotel's image," the receptionist added with an almost smug smile. "I'm sure you understand. Mr. De Niro is a longtime guest and a respected public figure. We can help arrange alternate accommodations for you, if you'd like." Leavitt stood still. She didn't speak. Not yet. Her thoughts raced. She wasn't just some regular guest. She was married to Thomas Leavitt, the billionaire owner of this entire hotel chain. But she had never needed to flaunt that connection before. She had always booked rooms like any guest, kept her head down, paid in full, and treated staff with respect. Yet here she was, being pushed aside for a celebrity. Worse, the way the receptionist said, "better for the hotel's image," didn't sit right. It sounded like a jab. And when Leavitt looked into the woman's eyes, she didn't see embarrassment or regret. She saw intent. It was personal. Leavitt had dealt with online hate before. She was a conservative media figure after all. But now it was happening in real life. Discrimination disguised as policy. Professionalism thrown out the window. All because someone didn't agree with her views. Her blood boiled. But she didn't show it. Instead, she smiled politely. "Thank you for your honesty." The receptionist looked momentarily triumphant, as if she'd scored a political win. She didn't realize she had just made the biggest mistake of her career. Leavitt stepped aside, pretending to take a phone call. What the receptionist didn't know was that her husband was just minutes away, and everything was about to change. As she moved to the corner of the lobby, Leavitt looked back one more time. The receptionist was now chatting cheerfully with a colleague, laughing as if nothing unusual had just happened. But the joke would soon be on her, because when you mess with someone you assume is powerless, you better make sure they're not married to the boss. And in this case, she was. Leavitt couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the last-minute room cancellation. It was the tone of it. The subtle smirk on the receptionist's face, the deliberately cold posture, and the way she avoided eye contact like she had something to hide. It all pointed to something deeper. She'd dealt with bias before. Online trolls, media hit jobs, Twitter mobs. It came with the territory. But this felt different. This was real life, face to face, in a luxury hotel lobby, and something about it stung more than the usual digital noise. Still, she stayed composed. She wasn't about to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. Leavitt turned, heels clicking against the polished marble floor, and began walking toward the exit. Her mind was racing. She needed to think. She needed air. But just as she passed a nearby arrangement of white lilies and orchids, she caught a voice behind her, the receptionist, whispering, carelessly loud enough for Leavitt to hear, as if she wanted to be heard. "That's the conservative commentator," she said to a fellow staff member, sneering like she'd just spotted something rotten in her fridge. "No way I'm giving her VIP treatment. Let her go stay somewhere else. This hotel doesn't support hate." Leavitt froze mid-step. She didn't turn around. She didn't make a sound, but her heart was pounding now. Not from hurt, but from clarity. There it was. The truth. This wasn't about overbooking. It wasn't about policy. It wasn't even about De Niro. It was personal, political, targeted. Leavitt, a public conservative voice, had just been cancelled, in real life. The receptionist, puffed up, with a false sense of justice, thought she was doing something brave, making a stand, punishing someone who, in her mind, represented everything wrong with the world. But what she didn't realize was just how wrong she had gotten it. Leavitt wasn't just a commentator. She was a businesswoman, a legal analyst, a best-selling author. She had debated on national television, built a following based on substance and principle, and fought tooth and nail to be respected in a world that increasingly rejected opposing viewpoints. More importantly, she was married to the man who owned this hotel, not just the building, the entire chain. The woman behind the desk, puffed up with performative outrage, had just decided to cancel the wrong customer, and Leavitt wasn't going to let that slide. She stepped outside the hotel, pulled out her phone, and dialed her husband, Thomas Leavitt. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, sweetheart, you checked in yet?" "No," she said calmly. "Apparently I was overbooked for Robert De Niro." There was a pause. Then, "What?" And just so you know, the receptionist made it clear. She knew exactly who I was. Told her coworker she wasn't giving VIP treatment to a conservative. Said this hotel doesn't support hate. Silence again. Not from confusion, but from contained fury. "Where are you right now?" he asked. "Just outside the lobby. I'll be there in 5. Leavitt tucked the phone back in her pocket and exhaled. It wasn't about revenge. It was about principle. The woman behind that desk had taken it upon herself to decide who deserved basic respect, not based on conduct or behavior, but on political affiliation. That kind of thinking was toxic. It was the same mentality that led to silencing division and fear. The idea that if someone doesn't agree with you, they don't deserve fair treatment. That it's somehow righteous to deny them dignity. Leavitt believed in something better. You could disagree with someone and still treat them with civility. You could hold strong opinions without weaponizing your job. And if this hotel, her hotel, had an employee who couldn't understand that, then there would be consequences. She stood tall, watching through the glass as guests came and went. Some were smiling, some distracted, some in a hurry. All of them expecting good service regardless of who they were or what they believed. And as her husband's black car pulled up to the curb, Leavitt knew one thing with absolute certainty. The papa woman behind that desk had no idea who she had just tried to humiliate. But she was about to find out. Just a few minutes later, the lobby doors slid open once more, and a commanding presence filled the room. A tall man in a crisp black suit walked through with quiet authority, polished shoes, no-nonsense posture, and a gaze that didn't wander. This was Thomas Leavitt, billionaire investor, founder of one of the most prestigious hotel chains in the country, and Leavitt's husband. Most people in the lobby didn't recognize him. He preferred it that way. Thomas was the kind of man who didn't flaunt his wealth. He let his work and his principles do the talking. He'd just come from a boardroom meeting across town, unaware that his wife, tired from travel, dismissed by staff, was being treated like an unwanted guest in her own family's hotel. As soon as he spotted her, standing at the counter, bags still at her feet, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and restraint, he knew something was wrong. He quickened his pace and stepped up beside her. "What's going on?" he asked, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. Before Leavitt could answer, the same receptionist who had denied her earlier, still unaware of who Thomas was, inserted herself into the conversation with smug confidence. "This guest's room was reassigned," she said curtly, tapping at her monitor without looking up. "We're at capacity. She'll have to find another hotel." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Really? We prioritize guests who align with our values," she added, with a sharpness in her tone she didn't bother to hide. Thomas paused. That line, that exact phrase. He turned to face her fully. "And what values are those exactly?" The receptionist finally looked up, and something flickered across her face. Uncertainty, confusion, maybe even a twinge of doubt. But still she pushed forward, emboldened by her own misplaced sense of moral superiority. She gave a dry, dismissive laugh. "You know, inclusion, progressiveness, standing up to people like her," she added, jerking her thumb in Leavitt's direction. The entire lobby seemed to freeze. Conversations quieted. A nearby bellhop glanced sideways. Even the clink of coffee cups in the lounge came to a stop. Thomas didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply looked the woman straight in the eye and asked calmly, "Do you know who I am?" The receptionist blinked. No, but if you're with her." He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and dialed a direct number. The line picked up immediately. Thomas spoke only 3 words. "Fire her immediately." Silence. A beat passed. Then, with absolute composure, he ended the call and slid the phone back into his pocket. The receptionist stared at him, stunned. "Excuse me? What?" "I own this hotel," Thomas said flatly, "and the 10 others in this region. What I don't own," he added, "is a brand that treats paying guests like second-class citizens because of personal politics." She stammered. "I was just trying to—" "You weren't hired to try anything," Thomas interrupted. "You were hired to provide world-class service. That's what this hotel stands for. That's what I stand for. You decided to judge someone not by how they behaved, but by what you assumed about their beliefs. You thought you were punishing a political ideology. What you really did was violate every principle of hospitality and decency we stand for." Leavitt stood quietly beside him, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to say anything. Her presence alone, dignified, restrained but fierce, spoke volumes. Thomas turned to her. "Come on, let's go to the penthouse. Your original suite was taken, but I think we can manage something better." He gave her a soft smile, then picked up her bags himself. The receptionist stood motionless, her entire posture deflating. In a matter of seconds, her moral crusade had turned into a career-ending decision. She had tried to make a statement, and instead, she became one. As the couple walked away, the energy in the lobby shifted. Guests whispered, a few even clapped quietly, not because someone had been fired, but because justice had been served with clarity and class. Leavitt had been publicly humiliated for her views, denied service, and judged by someone who didn't even know her. But she didn't scream, she didn't retaliate. She simply let the truth, and her husband's calm authority, speak louder than any insult. It wasn't about revenge, it was about respect, and in that moment, it was crystal clear who had it, and who had just lost it. The receptionist's face went pale. Her smug expression melted into panic as she took a nervous step back. "You can't do that. Who even are you?" she stammered, her voice rising in disbelief. And that was when Leavitt, who had remained composed and silent until now, finally stepped forward. Her shoulders were squared, her gaze unflinching. The hours of travel, the humiliation, the whispered insults. It had all led to this moment. She looked the receptionist straight in the eye and said, loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear, "This is Thomas Leavitt, my husband, and the owner of this entire hotel chain." A stunned hush fell across the grand lobby. Guests at the lounge turned their heads. Even the bellhops seemed frozen in place, eyes wide. The receptionist blinked as though trying to process what she'd just heard, like it was some kind of trick or prank. But the seriousness in Leavitt's tone, combined with the subtle but unmistakable authority Thomas carried, made it all too real. No, that's not possible," the receptionist said, her voice shaking. "That's not what this is about. She doesn't belong here. This hotel has a standard." "You're absolutely right," Thomas replied coolly. "And you just failed to meet it." Before the receptionist could respond, the elegant rhythm of expensive dress shoes echoed through the marble floor. Robert De Niro, flanked by two cheerful hotel staff, strolled through the entrance. The timing couldn't have been more cinematic. He looked around, smiling, blissfully unaware of the confrontation taking place. "Ah, beautiful lobby," he said to no one in particular, taking in the chandeliers and floral arrangements. He nodded politely to Leavitt and Thomas, not realizing the scene unfolding had anything to do with him. Thomas turned to the hotel manager, who had rushed over after the commotion. In a measured, no-nonsense tone, Thomas said, "Escort Mr. De Niro to a different suite, one that wasn't taken from another guest. I'm sure we can still make his stay memorable, but it won't come at the cost of fairness." The manager, looking like he'd just woken from a nightmare, nodded vigorously. "Yes, sir, of course. I'll handle it personally." Then Thomas added with quiet firmness, "And make sure my wife's suite is restored and prepared exactly as she requested. Fresh linens, her preferred scent, every detail. Double-check it yourself." The manager snapped to action immediately. "Right. Away, Mr. Leavitt." The receptionist, now visibly trembling, made one last desperate attempt to speak. "This isn't fair. I was just trying to do the right thing. People like her." Thomas raised a hand, silencing her. "You made a personal decision under the guise of company policy. You didn't just cancel a reservation, you canceled a person. And in this business, that's unacceptable." A pair of uniformed staff members appeared at his side. "Escort her out," Thomas instructed calmly, as they gently but firmly guided the stunned receptionist away. She continued trying to justify herself, but it was no use. The moment was over. The damage was done. And she wasn't just being let go. She was being shown what true accountability looked like. Leavitt stood silently, her presence strong and unshaken. She hadn't raised her voice once. She didn't need to. Justice had arrived, not with rage or spectacle, but with calm, deliberate truth. Robert De Niro, now halfway to the elevators, turned around with a puzzled look. "Everything all right?" Thomas smiled politely. "All good now. Thank you for your patience." Leavitt gave him a nod. "Enjoy your stay." And with that, the chaos faded as quickly as it had ignited. The lobby returned to its polished hum of normalcy. Guests whispered amongst themselves, many of them glancing at Leavitt with newfound respect. The story would undoubtedly spread, first through the hotel, then online, as such stories do. But for Leavitt, the real victory wasn't in the spectacle, it was in the principle. She had been judged, dismissed, and targeted for her beliefs, not her behavior. And rather than lash out, she had stood her ground, allowing truth and character to do what outrage never could, earn real, lasting respect. As she and Thomas rode the elevator up to the penthouse suite, she glanced at him and smiled. "Thanks for showing up when you did." He looked at her with a grin. You didn't need me, but I wasn't going to let it slide. Back in control, back in grace, and back where she belonged. Not just in the hotel, but in the narrative. Because the real story wasn't about politics. It was about dignity, and this time, dignity won. Later that evening, Leavitt sat on her suite's balcony with her husband, sipping coffee and watching the city lights. What bothered me most, she said, wasn't the politics. It was the arrogance. She thought her personal bias was more important than professionalism. Thomas nodded. This is exactly why we built our own institutions. When people try to cancel others, they always assume they're punching up. They never stop to think, maybe the person they're judging is actually in a position to change their future. The story quickly made headlines. Social media lit up, with people debating who was right and wrong. But at the center of it was a powerful truth. Cancel culture doesn't always win. Sometimes it backfires, hard. And for one liberal receptionist who let her politics cloud her judgment, it wasn't just a room she lost that day. It was her job and her reputation. Like stories that keep you on the edge of your seat? Then, smash that like button and subscribe for more real-life drama you won't believe is true.